For 32 hours, they thought the old woman was another casualty of the swamp. But as the real enemy took aim, a single shot echoed. They weren't saved by a soldier, they were saved by a ghost. The air at Fort Cormorant tasted of damp pine and humidity, even at dawn. Before the first rays of sun crested the tree line, a lone figure moved with silent purpose on the training grounds. She wasn't a young recruit, eager to prove their mettle. She was Eleanor Vance, 60 years old, her steel-gray hair pulled back in a tight, practical braid. The younger soldiers called her Ellie, but never to her face. To them, she was the Grandma Ghost. The nickname had stuck. She had a way of appearing without a sound, of observing more than she spoke, a spectral presence in their world of loud boasts and youthful energy. As two recruits jogged past, one nudged the other. "Look," he snickered, "Grandma Ghost is talking to the wind again." Ellie didn't flinch. She was calibrating a vintage anemometer, her weathered fingers making minute adjustments, her eyes tracking the subtle shifts in the air currents. This quiet disconnect was most apparent in the mess hall. While recruits huddled together, loudly comparing their latest run times and bench press stats, Ellie sat alone. She wasn't isolating, she was studying. Spread before her was not a standard issue map, but a worn, hand-drawn topographical chart of the Blackwater Maze, the sprawling swamp that bordered the base. It was covered in her own spidery annotations, notes on seasonal water levels and animal migration patterns gathered over decades. The proving grounds were no different. Corporal Diaz, a cocky recruit with more confidence than discipline, was all about speed. He'd empty a magazine in a blur of motion, peppering the general vicinity of the target. His speed was impressive, but his accuracy was a prayer. Then it was Ellie's turn. She moved with an unhurried grace. She didn't rush her shot. She stood, rifle shouldered, and simply waited, breathing slowly. She was listening to the wind, feeling it on her cheek. When a lull came, a brief moment of stillness in the chaotic air, she exhaled smoothly and squeezed the trigger. Crack. A single, clean hole appeared in the dead center of the target 200 yards away. Diaz scoffed, shaking his head. "Too slow, Grandma. Way too slow. In a real fight, speed is life." Ellie calmly ejected the single brass casing, her gaze unwavering. "In a real fight, Corporal," she said, her voice soft but clear, "the first shot is often the only one that matters." The mission briefing for Operation Blackwater Maze was designed to inspire fear. Sergeant Miller, a man whose muscles had muscles, stood before the assembled soldiers, his face grim. "Listen up," he barked. "This swamp is a meat grinder. It chews up pride and spits out failure. 36 hours. Limited rations. Full hostile simulation. It will test your body, your mind, and your soul." He pointed to a large map, sectioned into different routes. One snaked through the heart of the marsh, a dark red line marked with warnings of deep water, treacherous cypress roots, and venomous snakes. "This," Miller said, tapping it, "is the Serpent's Path. It's the fastest route to the objective, and the deadliest. It requires a solo operative for recon. Any volunteers?" A heavy silence fell over the room. The recruits shifted, avoiding eye contact. They were confident, but not stupid. Then, a quiet voice cut through the tension. "I'll take it." Every head turned. It was Ellie. She stood perfectly still, her expression calm. A wave of disbelief, followed by stifled snickers, rippled through the recruits. Diaz leaned over to his friend, whispering, "If Grandma makes it through the Serpent's Path, I'll eat my rifle." Sergeant Miller's eyes narrowed. He strode over to Ellie, his sheer size towering over her. "Vance," he said, his voice low and laced with condescending concern. "With all due respect, ma'am, this path breaks men half your age. Are you absolutely sure?" "I'm sure, Sergeant," Ellie replied, her gaze meeting his without a flicker of doubt. "The harder the path, the fewer eyes on it. Miller stared at her for a long moment, then shrugged, a gesture of dismissal. Fine. It's your lesson to learn. Her preparations were as unconventional as she was. While others packed standard-issue MREs, Ellie packed her own vacuum-sealed portions of high-protein deer jerky. She didn't just check her radio, she painstakingly waterproofed every critical component with a small tin of beeswax. Later that afternoon, another soldier saw her behind the barracks, sitting cross-legged, practicing a slow, rhythmic breathing exercise. He just shook his head. "Weird old lady," he muttered, oblivious that he was witnessing her sharpening her most formidable weapon, her focus. Before she left, she took a moment alone with her rifle. It was an older State Route 25, the wood grain of the stock worn smooth in places. It had belonged to her late husband, a master scout. She ran a hand over it, a silent promise to him, and to herself. At 0400 hours, Ellie Vance melted into the oppressive darkness of the Blackwater maze. She didn't use a flashlight. Her feet, clad in worn leather boots, found purchase on the treacherous ground as if by memory. The swamp swallowed her whole, the sounds of chirping insects and the low grunt of a distant alligator closing in behind her. She was gone. 12 hours later, radio silence from her channel was met with cynical certainty by the main team. "Told you so," Corporal Diaz announced to anyone who would listen, as they navigated a much easier route. "Guess Grandma Ghost finally called her grandkids for a pickup. Can't blame her." 24 hours in, a blip appeared on a screen in the command tent. A junior signals engineer squinted at the thermal display. "Sir. I've got a faint, intermittent thermal signature on the northwest edge. It's too stable to be an animal. The oscillation pattern, it could be optics adjusting." The commander, focused on the main team's progress, waved it off. "Probably a glitch in the sensor. Stay focused on the primary objective. No diversions." That single decision hung in the air, unheard by the men slogging through the mud, a critical thread of information severed by assumption. They continued forward, utterly blind to the fact they were being hunted. But Ellie wasn't lost. She wasn't a casualty. She was exactly where she wanted to be. From the moment she entered the swamp, her senses were on high alert. Her lifetime of experience as a park ranger had taught her to read the subtle language of the wild. She saw things the recruits would never notice, a boot print, too deep and narrow for standard-issue gear, pressed into the mud near a cypress knee. A freshly snapped branch, broken against the prevailing wind direction. And then, at hour 6, the definitive sign, a faint, metallic glint from a ridge a half-mile away. The sun catching a scope lens. She didn't panic. She moved with meticulous slowness, using the terrain as her camouflage. She found her perch, a small, mossy hummock hidden perfectly by a thick curtain of ferns. From here, she had a clear line of sight to the extraction point. And she began her wait, her breathing slow and steady, her presence erased from the world. She had seen the real enemy. Not a simulation. Professionals. And they were setting a trap. The world shrank to the few square feet of mud and ferns that was Ellie's hide. The next 26 hours were a descent into a private, silent hell. The swamp was a living entity, and it wanted to break her. Swarms of mosquitoes, a whining, bloodthirsty veil, descended upon any exposed inch of skin. Leeches, slick and black, attached themselves to her ankles in the cold, murky water. Hunger was a dull, persistent ache in her stomach. Her deer jerky was for a true emergency, this was just a test of endurance. Thirst was worse. It was a fire in her throat, a sandpaper rasp with every swallow. She survived by licking the dew that collected on the broad fern leaves above her, a few precious drops at a time. Her muscles screamed in protest, cramping from the cold and the forced stillness. A lesser person would have shifted, stretched, made a sound. Ellie turned inward. She began the breathing exercise her husband had taught her decades ago. Inhale for 4. Hold for 16. Exhale for 8. The box breathing centered her, pushing the pain and discomfort into a distant corner of her mind. It was a mental fortress. In that state, memories surfaced not as distractions, but as reinforcements. She remembered outwaiting a poacher in the Montana wilderness for 2 days in a blizzard, the cold a far more brutal enemy than this damp chill. She remembered her husband's voice, a low rumble like distant thunder. Patience is a weapon, Ellie. The most powerful one you have. It lets you see what others miss. Through her scope, she saw them. 2 men. Not soldiers playing a game. These were professionals. Their gear was top of the line, their movements economical and precise. They set up their sniper nest with chilling efficiency, their ghillie suits making them all but invisible. They used hand signals, never speaking. They were a seamless unit of death. Her hand drifted to her radio. The thought was a siren's call. Call it in. Report the threat. But she knew what would happen. Their advanced equipment would pinpoint her transmission instantly. She would save herself, but she would be exposing the only counter-threat they had. Her position was the team's only ace. The internal monologue was swift and clear. Call it in, and you die first, but they might get away. Stay silent, and maybe, just maybe, you can save those arrogant, foolish kids. Around hour 30, as her resolve began to fray under the sheer weight of exhaustion, she heard it. Faintly, carried on the wind from across the marsh, the sound of laughter. It was her team, nearing the extraction point, loud and blissfully unaware. The sound, so full of life and ignorance, solidified her choice. She wasn't just a forgotten old woman in the mud. She was a shepherd. And she would not abandon her flock to the wolves. At hour 32, the team stumbled out of the dense cypress forest and into the clearing designated as the extraction point. They were tired, muddy, but triumphant. They had made it. They moved into the open, directly into the meticulously prepared kill zone. From his hidden nest, the enemy sniper saw them. He calmly acquired his target, Sergeant Miller, the team leader, standing front and center, looking at his map. The sniper's index finger curled, taking up the slack on the trigger. The world held its breath. Crack. The sound was not the loud boom of a standard military rifle. It was a single, sharp, authoritative report that sliced through the air. It didn't come from the enemy position. It came from the swamp itself. The enemy sniper, the hunter, became the hunted. He didn't even cry out. He simply slumped forward, a neat, black hole drilled perfectly through the center of his high-powered scope, a testament to an impossible shot. His spotter, stunned, scrambled for cover, disappearing into the undergrowth. Ellie's team stood frozen, their bravado evaporating in a wave of cold fear and confusion. Then, a voice, hoarse and cracked from dehydration, broke the radio silence. Target neutralized. Coordinate 749 by 211. Threat is eliminated. It was Ellie's voice. The medic, reacting on instinct, sprinted toward the coordinates. He found her lying sideways on the small hummock, nearly indistinguishable from the mud and foliage she was buried in. She looked like a statue carved from earth and willpower, a relic of the swamp itself. Only her eyes, clear and fiercely bright, seemed alive. Sergeant Miller approached slowly, his face a mask of shock, shame, and a dawning, profound respect. He knelt, wordlessly removing her soaked cap. "Vance, how?" he breathed, the question encompassing everything, the shot, the silence, the impossible endurance. Ellie met his gaze, her body trembling with exhaustion, but her voice steady. "I only had 1 round left," she whispered. 1 round was enough. The debrief back at Fort Cormorant was chilling. The enemy was no simulation. It was a top-tier, live-fire assessment designed by High Command to test if their soldiers could distinguish a game from a genuine, lethal threat. Every other team in the exercise had failed, walking past similar, smaller threats, treating everything as part of the drill. Ellie Vance was the only one who had passed. The after-action report concluded simply, she had saved 8 lives. The culture at Fort Cormorant changed overnight. The moniker, Grandma Ghost, was never uttered again, except in tones of reverence. When Ellie walked through the base, the young soldiers who had mocked her, especially Corporal Diaz, snapped to attention, their eyes filled with a humility they hadn't known they were capable of. Quietness was no longer mistaken for weakness. Her methods became legend, formalized into official training doctrine as the advanced doctrine, or more popularly, the 32-to-1 principle. The philosophy was simple: 32 hours of patience, observation, and preparation for one single moment of decisive, perfect action. The base even added a new course, threat recognition psychology. A picture of Ellie, taken after her rescue, was placed in the main hall. The caption didn't mention heroism. It said, "The most powerful weapon is not the rifle. It is patience." Ellie politely declined an offer to join an elite training cadre. "I just needed to know I still had it," was her only explanation. She returned to her quiet life, her point proven not to them, but to herself. Her story, however, took on a life of its own. It spread through military networks and then seeped into the civilian world. In corporate boardrooms filled with ageist assumptions, "We need a Vance in this meeting," became quiet shorthand for needing a seasoned expert who could see past the noise and identify the real problem. Ellie's silent vigil in the swamp became a parable for a modern world obsessed with youth, speed, and self-promotion. It was a powerful reminder that wisdom, experience, and silent resilience often reside where we least expect them. We have all, at some point, been underestimated, for our age, our gender, or simply because we are quiet. If you, like Ellie, have ever used your unique strength to prove the doubters wrong, share your story in the comments with the hashtag #CommentRespect. Let's honor the silent guardians among us. And if you are moved by this story of courage and wisdom, please subscribe and share it with others. Because sometimes, true strength isn't about making the most noise. It's about being the one who takes the shot that counts.